I was really a big just comic fan. I was coming up during the 80s and then early 90s, I think I was really starting to get into it more and more. Like comic books were opened up nearby me and I could just go ride my bike every Wednesday and every Saturday and just pick up books. I was at the point where I was 14 and I actually got hired to work at that comic book store because I was just around all the time, you know? So they were like, let's hire this kid.
What were some of the seminal influences for you, the things, either they were books or characters that kind of put you on the path to where you are today?
It sounds silly to say it was my destiny to work in comics, but I feel like that's how it was. Because I was a little kid, that's all I cared about, was just comic books. Like if you go back and look at like my 4th grade yearbook, it says like, it actually says comic book editor. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up. Like I was just obsessed with it. Like both my parents had read comics when they were younger. And so I grew up, there was like always a short box in the house. And so going through and looking, and there were a lot of older books too. So we had like Jack Kirby and Stan doing Fantastic Four. There was some Doom Patrol in there. There was like Strange Adventures. There was Brave and the Bold. I've always been a DC kid. But when it comes to like influencing me, I mean, there's a lot. I feel like I absorbed a lot of different stuff. I mean, go from like Grant Morrison's work. You know, if you look at stuff that he was doing with like Kill Your Boyfriend or Invisibles, and then he did JLA, and he was working on Aztec. Mark Waid on Flash was a really big one. Like Return of Barry Allen is one of my favorite Flash stories, and the work that he did there really shaped a lot of stuff I wanted to do. Garth Ennis is a big one for me. I didn't realize until I was like a little older looking back and being like, oh yeah, I totally ripped Garth Ennis off all the time. So that must be an influence. But when he was working on Hitman and Preacher, when he was on Constantine, and I think two of the biggest influences on me were Geoff Johns and Brian Michael Bendis. I mean, those are the two that I think when I was getting out of high school, going into college, those are creators that, it's funny, I think when you're younger, there's a lot of creators that you don't discover, right? Like they're already around, and when you go and you start figuring out who they are, they have this huge backlog. But it's interesting when you have creators that are people that are kind of like coming into their own as you're discovering them. Like with Bendis, I was reading stuff from him that was like Torso and Goldfish and Jinx, and reading that, and then when he went to do Daredevil with Spider-Man, I was like, yeah, that guy that like only I know about is getting these jobs. And with Geoff Johns, actually, I remember I working at a comic book shop all through high school and college, and I actually had stopped. And you know, it's funny when you work at a shop, you're so used to being around comics, and you change jobs or change whatever. Suddenly, you find yourself falling behind for a little bit, because then you're like, oh man, I have to buy these. And I had fallen behind on Flash, and I've been reading Flash since like Mark Waid taken over all the way through. I was just always reading it, and I'd fallen behind a little bit. And I remember I went to a friend's house, and he had 3 copies of Geoff Johns' Flash from Wonderland. It was like he just started on it. And I remember being like, oh man, let's see how this book is, and being kind of a little snot about it. And then I remember reading it and being like, these are amazing. And it was funny because when I got the job writing the Flash, the person that actually told me officially I had it. Because before, everyone kept saying like, oh, we're thinking or we're talking, but no one actually sat me down and was like, this is your job now and you need to work on this now. Until I was in a room with Jeff, and Jeff, we were talking and we were telling how long we've known each other for. And I was like, yeah, I met you right when you had just started writing Flash. And he was like, oh man, that's cool, yeah, and now you're writing Flash. And that was the first time anyone told me I had the job, and he's like, I was like, all right, cool, what now? And he's like, we gotta get to work, dude. So we sat there, we started working on it, you know.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Like one of those full circle moments in your life where that you at 20 would never have imagined being in that room and getting that news.
Never crossed my mind. I mean, it was one of those things you want and you love, because I love the Flash. He's, you know, one of my favorite DC characters, and it's like I've always wanted to work on him. That I always felt like it was impossible. But I almost think that was what gave me the edge on the book, was that it's weird because I thought it would never happen, so I wasn't as nervous and afraid as some people. Like it was different. Like I wanted it really badly, but not to the point where I was like, oh no. I was very like, well, here's what I want to do. If it doesn't happen, that's okay. It's something I really want, but it might never happen. And that, I think that energy definitely, they could tell I was passionate about it, definitely went into it and helped me get that job. But yeah, Jeff was a huge influence. And actually early on, I was trying to, when you're first learning how to write comics, you should get your hands on scripts.
Yeah.
And I'll get my hands on a bunch here and there, and then Jeff's was the first one that I really responded to when I was reading it, like reading the script, not just the comic, but reading the script. And so I started like even just copying his format to sort of figure some stuff out. So, and then later on, Bennett has a program at PSU.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was his very first student. I was in the very first class,
Wow, that's amazing.
So I was in that class early on. And I still sometimes will think back to that class when I'm writing and think about things that Bendis taught.
What did you learn most from that? Was it structure? Was it how to formulate an idea in the best possible way for the format? Or
no, with Bendis it was really about voice and having a voice as a writer and having your take and making sure you put yourself into it. Like you can read a Bendis book and know it's a Bendis book, right? And like him and I have talked about this, and he's definitely changed styles over the years, but you can still read one of his books and say that it's a Bendis book. One of the best things I took away from his class, and I think about this, and sometimes I'll quote it when we're doing like meetings about the characters. early on in Ultimate Spider-Man, it was Ultimate Spider-Man 13, where Peter told Mary Jane that he was Spider-Man. And the reason Brian did that is because he fully believed that, 14, 15-year-old Peter Parker would 100% tell Mary Jane.
Yes.
That was his belief. He was like, this kid would tell that girl. He would. That's just true to his character. And so even now when I'm writing, I always think about that. I try to slow down for a second and think, what would this character actually do here? Like when we were working on The Button, which was the Batman Flash crossover, there's a scene in it where Bruce Wayne and Barry Allen, they're in the Flashpoint world, and Bruce is able to talk to his dad for the first time. And originally that scene was different. I had written it different. And then I had this moment, I was going for a walk, and I was like, what would Bruce actually tell his dad? What would he really tell him in that moment? I was like, oh, he would tell him he's a granddad. That's actually what he would say. Like, peel everything else away of like danger, all this stuff. Like, what is the most human thing he would say? And he'd be like, oh, you have a grandchild.
Yeah.
That's what he would want to tell him. And I remember calling the editors and telling them that, and they're like, oh, man, we just got goosebumps. And so we rewrote that scene so we could have that in there. But I got that because of Bendis.
You mentioned part of your process, which is you're kind of known for, which is the walking around, talking to yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Do you still do it? Is
Yeah.
it part of your process?
I could put my phone out, I could put play on there, and you could hear probably the last thing I did. But
That's
yeah, I
crazy.
still do that. I've cut back on a little bit more about time, and also it was snowing in Portland.
There you go.
And it was raining, so it was a little hard to do that. But yeah, I definitely still do that. I'll go for walks. I mean, that's why I have a recording on my phone where there was an issue of Flash where Eobard Thawne, Reverse Flash, and Barry Allen were fighting across time. And it was mostly just Eobard yelling at Barry. And so I totally have a recording of that on my phone
Really?
with me yelling at Barry. I got really heated, actually. It sounds like I'm yelling at someone.
That's authentic. You're in it. You're in the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it like a form of method, right? I don't know. Like I'm trying to put myself in that character, and
Yeah.
what I'll do is I'll start just like ranting. I think of it like I put this in sound weird. It's like therapy. Like if you go to therapy and you talk to a therapist, or if you're the therapist talking to somebody, you would ask them questions about themselves. So you would say like, "How do you feel about this?" Or "Tell me something about yourself." And what I'll do is I'll do that with a character, and then I'll try to type up what I think the character would say in those moments, and that a lot of that goes into the books.
Well, that makes all the sense. When you're writing well, the best writing is the writing that you can read, and it sounds authentic. So you're just doing it a little bit ahead of the game. You're saying it before you put it on a paper so that it sounds like it's authentic and it would be said by somebody like that would really be saying it.
Yeah, I try to do that. It's sometimes a matter of time.
Yeah.
Like if I had the time I would want for everything, I would always try and do that.
Let's talk about another new project, which is Justice League No Justice. You get to kind of do this as a writer's room because there's several really big writers that you're making a world, you're making a big overarching story, and writers that individually do episodes, but you're all breaking the story together. So tell me a little bit about how you guys that's a metaphor for it, but it's different on how you're actually doing it. What makes this project, all of your creative ideas mesh, and then how to get all of that in a cohesive story?
Well, me and Scott Snyder and James Snyder, we all get along really well, and so the three of us, we talk almost every day anyway, and so that's where a lot of the origin of this project came in, is us just like bouncing ideas about doing this big story that would kind of mix things up and change things coming out of metal, because it definitely comes like immediately out of ramifications of metal into this, and then we wanted to have like a ground zero for other things we wanted to do. And so the three of us, just because we talk every day and we were already working on metal together, it was sort of this idea like, well, how do we keep this going? How do we keep this energy? And we just started talking about the Justice League, and that led into us kind of going into this with No Justice. What's interesting is that, it's a lot of us talking on the phone. Like it's a lot because we all live in different places. At the time, James was in Burbank, I was in Portland, and Scott is in New York. And so the three of us on the phone all the time, or chat or text, and we start just developing things from there. And then, it changes depending on what it is. And with this, it's not like we have one outline and each one of us is taking a script. It's like we're all working on every script together. You can see bits and pieces of all of us in there. I mean, if somebody we actually did this project called Batman Lost for Metal, and that was like that too, where it was all of us. That one was a little bit like, I'm responsible for this, you're responsible for that. But then we would pass it back and forth and suggest things or write things or talk things out. There's a short for No Justice that we were working on, and the three of us would talk on the phone about it. We would try to figure some stuff out, just bouncing ideas back and forth. And at one point, Scott and I were on the phone. Oh, it was James and I, actually. James and I were on the phone, and we're sitting there, and we're just like trying to figure this thing out. And we're like, okay, we have 10 pages. Let's do it like this. And we started going back and forth, and we got excited. And then we're like, all right, page 1. And so while they're on the phone, we're just like, page 1 is this, 2, 3 will be this, 3, 4 will be this. And then we'll do this on page 8, make the whole thing. And then he's just like, all right, cool, I'm going to go write it right now. And then I'll hand it to you. I'll write my notes and I'll hand it to you. And I was like, dude, James, I was writing while we were talking, man. Like, I've already done it. Like, while you were here, I go on speaker. You couldn't hear me. I was tapping away, and I had already written the breakdowns for it. And then I pass it to James, and then we go to Scott. We're like, hey, check this out, and then the three of us start working on it, and then he gets his pass on it. So it's really kind of an interesting dynamic of us sort of passing these things around.
Yeah.
Like there's no one scene that somebody can say, I wrote that scene, or that was my idea here, or this. I mean, there's times where we can be like, and we're all very, again, we all get along really well. So among us, we might know like, oh man, that line you wrote, that was really good. Like we know that, but we're not going to tell anybody that. Like we're not going to I'm not going to put my little signature.
Right.
I'm going to sign every line that was mine.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can really see it, just because we do get along. We all have the same kind of aesthetic for what we want to do. And Scott's really good at trying to push things and make them bigger and try to make it so it feels this epic thing. Scott's really good at that.
Yeah.
I think it is a unique thing in comics the way we're working, because I'll hear different people do different styles. Us, it is a little chaotic at times, but I think it works.
That's awesome. Because you have been able to do books on your own, books with the groups and stuff, is there a point for you as a writer that you feel that there was a book that you were writing that kind of helped you identify, this is my groove, I'm feeling like I'm maybe at my strongest, or I'm finally in a place where the confidence that you talked about before really clicked in for you?
I think there's two books, I think, that definitely changed the way I think about writing comics. Well, that's really three, I guess, but one of the biggest ones was I did a book for Image called Ghosted, and that was one, but I felt like I was always writing to something, to an expectation that I had, not that was being put on me, but I was like, oh, they're going to want a comic like this, so I should write this. Not, I want to write a comic like this. And so I was working on Ghosted, and that was the one that I finally was like, well, this is what I would do. So that one really shaped me a lot. And then we get over to Flash, and like Flash, when I finally got to that, I remember writing issue 1 over Thanksgiving weekend. I just knew it. That was one of the things where I was like, this is the kind of superhero book I would want to do. And that's been a big part of Flash. And I think Flash has taught me a lot of stuff about keeping the juices flowing of creativity. Justice League Suicide Squad was a crossover we did.
Yes,
I learned a lot from that one. I learned a lot from that one. And then Metal too. I think Metal definitely shaped a lot of stuff.
How long, when you have been on a run for so long, and a character really does start to kind of become part of your creative DNA, you can hear their voice as much as you hear yours talking to yourself.
Yeah.
Is there a possession or kind of an ownership to that you don't want to let go of?
I feel like it's my turn right now, but I feel like comics are a relay race, and I am interested and excited for when it is my time to pass it on. Like, I'm very curious. My advice to that person would be not do what I did, like do your own thing, like make it your own. Don't just do what I do, because I'm a huge Flash fan. And so for me, when it's my turn to pass the baton over, I want that person to do something that is unexpected and surprising and different than what I'm doing, because again, like I want to be able to read the book and be able to kind of go into it as a fan again, not just somebody who worked on it. But these characters are important to me, and there are such huge legacy with them.
Yeah, and it's a character that's kind of getting his day in other mediums now too. We get to see him on his own show. We get to see him as part of the Justice League. Is it weird in a way to have the Barry that you write in your head and then see him in other ways? Is it just like seeing little different facets of him, or does it feel like that's not my Barry, but I can appreciate that Barry?
I feel like it's really exciting actually, because I think one of the things that DC has done really well over the years is having different interpretations of the characters out at the same time. For a really long time, it felt like Batman was the only character that had that. It was like Batman, you could have Batman 66, you had Tim Burton, and you had Nolan, and then you had the cartoon, and there was, and even in the comics, there were so many different versions of Batman out there. Like if you were a Batman fan, it didn't feel like this is the one and only Batman, right? But for a bit there, it felt like he was the only character like that. And I think since around the early 2000s, I think that started changing for all the DC characters. You had, if you were a Green Lantern fan, you could read this Green Lantern thing or this Green Lantern thing. You can go out and find these different interpretations. Same with Wonder Woman, same with Superman, and now with Flash. And so to me, that's really exciting to see a character that I've loved since I was a kid now in that same realm as how Batman was, where there's different interpretations of him out there. And now if you are a fan of this particular Flash, that's out there for you. So to me, that's really, really fun.